Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Two Point Capital Management, an investment firm working with clients to create custom portfolios of stocks and bonds. Two Point is dedicated to helping people manage financial risk in good times and bad. More at twopointcapital.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made late one night in May of 1974 when a convoy of families packed up their vehicles and left their homes forever. This group of Native Americans had been living on reservations in Mohawk territory in Quebec, but had grown frustrated with overcrowding and with drugs and alcoholism. They wanted to return to their traditional ways of life, to be self-sufficient and live off the land. They followed the tributaries of the St. Lawrence River to find a new home in New York. The group drove to Moss Lake and Eagle Bay in the heart of the Adirondacks. Moving into an abandoned girls' camp, they established a new settlement that they called Ganyanque, meaning land of the flint. The Mohawks called it a repossession of their own land. At first, they said their new home was idyllic, but that didn't last long. Tensions developed between members of Ganyanque in this community and the state government and people who lived in the nearby town who said that the Mohawks were illegally seizing land. The state was hesitant to act, wanting to avoid violence that had plagued the state in recent years, notably the second Wounded Knee Massacre and the Attica protests. No one wanted a fight. And what happened next is one for the history books, although if you're like me, they weren't in your history book. This is a new story for me. Our guest this hour will tell us that story. And many of us will not be familiar with it, even if it was covered by major media outlets at the time. Walter Cronkite, many others, really didn't get into history books. This hour, we hear the story of the Ganyanque community and where it was, what it has come to be, how things are going now, and some of the lessons there. We also discuss what our guests want others to know about reclaiming their land and their culture, treaty rights, and these kind of relationships in 2025. And I'd like to welcome our guests now. There's a film that we're going to be talking about. It's called This Land. And documentary filmmaker and director, producer, and editor of This Land is Mike Bradley, who is with us. Mike, thank you for making time for us.
Very glad to be here.
Tyler Hemlock is a Ganyanque community member. Tyler, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks.
And Raiwate is with us as well. Raiwate is a Ganyanque community member. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you for having us.
And Daryl Martin, also a member of the community, is on the line with us. Hello, Daryl. Thanks for making time for us.
Hi, I'm so pleased to be here.
Okay, so let's start with this. Let's start the fact that there is the Rochester International Film Festival coming up Thursday, 7:30, Friday, 7:30, Saturday at 3 o'clock and 7:30. You've got a chance to see some of these films at the Dryden. And for Mike Bradley, I said this was a story that was new for me. Why is this a story that you as a filmmaker wanted to tell now?
Yeah, it was new to me as well. I think that's a pretty common story. A lot of people that I've shown the film to so far, even people who grew up as close as, very close to Eagle Bay, even in Eagle Bay, didn't know anything about this. And I think it's an important chapter in our history around here that we should know about.
It's a film that runs about 19 minutes, and this is a festival where the max length is 30 minutes. You're cramming a lot of history in this, but why do you think, so many people who are not Native are growing up without these stories in their history books?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of reasons. With this particular story, I think both sides, for lack of a better term, sort of benefited from it not being prominent in history books. I think both sides sort of didn't get everything that they wanted in the negotiation. I think the state of New York probably is not thrilled to have had this negotiation go the way it did. They did end up giving land to the people, and I don't know that they want that to be a precedent that everyone knows about.
Okay. And what do you hope people learn when they see your film?
For me, I think one of the biggest things about this story is the way that, frankly, just that, which is that it was resolved mostly peacefully, and the community was established, and it still exists today, and that this should be, to me, an example of the way that we can negotiate our differences in a way that ultimately ends pretty much amicably for everybody.
RochesterFilmFest.org has all the information if you want to get the full schedule, you want to learn a little bit more and make plans to do that here. And in the credits of this film, Mike, you thank Ganundigan Historic Site. How did you work with Ganundigan?
Yeah, one of the interviews that's included in the film was shot at Ganundigan. They graciously allowed us to use a space there to film an interview.
Okay. So this land will screen Thursday, 7:30 p.m. They would love to see you there at the Dryden. And I want to take the time to kind of let our guests tell their own story of not only the land, but what happened 50 years ago, what has happened since. And I'm going to start with Tyler. Do you think, most non-native people in this state know this story at all? I certainly didn't know it.
No, no. I remember my uncle and others who would go on speaking engagements. This is while we were in Moss Lake. They'd go on speaking engagements to schools, universities, and I remember questions that were asked that when they would get back and say, "Oh, you know what they asked me, my uncle? You know what they asked me? They asked me if Indians grew feathers out of their head." And these are the kind of questions that you know what I mean. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that people didn't realize that.
How does that hit you when you hear that kind of question?
I don't know. It just like I kind of feel bad, like that people just don't know who we are, that we're part of this land and that we actually exist as human beings, and we're totally different from other societies. We have our own culture and our own language, and nobody even knows about it, and it's like so it's you got to live with that, and try the best you can to try to bring it back, but. Yeah, it's more or less like I just kind of feel bad that it's at that point,
Yeah, and in the 1970s, as the film reminds us, Attica had happened, New York State. There was a lot of tension. Certainly, state leaders did not want the kinds of horrible stories that came out of Attica to be repeated, and yet. Everything I'm trying to read and follow up after watching the film, it's like they're still calling in state police. I mean, it was not, it didn't look like the most peaceful scene. I mean, how would you describe the story for what happened?
You know what? There was a man that came through Ganyange that lived there for a little while, that was in Attica. He survived, he covered himself, he was an inmate. He covered himself with one of the bodies. That's how he survived. And he came through. He told us what happened. He told us some of the things what he got, what he seen, and what happened. And it was like, it's all scared, because they were saying I remember hearing they were going to come in and take us out. They were asking us to take the women and children, and could you send them out? They were going to come in and like wipe us out. That's the understanding that we had, and it's like that it was the same troop that was in Attica, and so it was a little scary,
And so in your mind, it was a possibility that could be repeated.
Yeah, I was 13 at the time.
Yeah.
So I was just a kid, and I had to carry a gun bigger than me, and I remember them saying, okay, use. There was a group of us. Teenagers at the same age level, and they says, "You guys are in charge of protecting the women and children."
Wow!
And we were children ourselves, I remember digging bunkers and
wow,
like weeks on end in a bunker, taking shifts, like sleeping a few hours, then shifting off with setting up our own routine, and just like there was about 6 or 8 of us, like at that age level, that we were doing that, taking care of the women and children.
Well, Tyler, explain a little bit about why you left the reservation in the first place. In the film we hear about things like overcrowding of of non-native people, drugs and alcohol. How would you describe the reason for why Ganyanke was formed?
Yeah, basically all that. It's like you couldn't go anywhere. There was nothing for you to do. Our whole lifestyle, our whole way of life was actually taken away from you. You know, and you put on this little piece of land where you're used to going and providing for your families, like hunting and for what we knew how to do. You know, and all that was like you can't do that on a small plot of land that was given. You know, and it's like how are you supposed to survive? So we have to change our whole lifestyle, our whole culture, our whole everything has to, even our language. All these things we had to adjust it to living on this little, and then this little plot of land where people weren't able to do what they're used to doing, their whole lifestyle. So like you start getting like a lot of alcoholism and drug addiction and stuff like that. It's like, what do you do? You know, like everywhere you turn, that's what's there. You know, like, and that's what it become. You know.
So did you find that you were able to get that kind of a fresh start at Ganyange? Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. I grew up there. I grew up at that age that I was at was the age that they start training the young men. That's part of our traditions, you know, our culture, where they start training the young men to, you're changing your voice, you're becoming a man, you know, like, so they start raising you and putting you up there. And we were able to do that. I was able to be free going in the bush and staying there for days on end, you know, and by yourself, you know, like just being part of who we are, being part of the natural world around you, you know, being part of that, being one of that, becoming one, and feeling that sense of freedom, and it was just really a good feeling to be able to do that. You know, I never experienced that before that, you know, like, and so after that, it was like a lot of these younger guys started doing that, but started being able to do that, and it really, it's uplifting, you know, for to know that there's actually it's actually there, you know, to feel part of that.
Well, next to Tyler is Raiwate, who your grandparents helped plan the move, I think, to Moss Lake in 1974, and then your mother and grandmother are featured in the film that we're talking about here. You've lived at Ganyange most of your life, is that right?
Yes. My time in Ganyange started 1983 when I was born. So, and I've been there ever since.
What was childhood like for you there?
Childhood like? For the longest time, I was practically the only child there in Ganyange. So I grew up mostly around my elders. I hung out with them. So most of my life was spent around older adults, or if I wasn't hanging out with them, I was playing in the woods, playing in the water, and that's pretty much my childhood.
So when Tyler talks about getting connected to the earth and getting a chance to really feel that connection differently than many people who are listening to this today would experience, what was that like for you when you talk about being outside, getting connected? What does that mean?
Well, speaking from that time, I wouldn't really be able to tell you what that was like, because that was just normal for me.
It was every day.
It was just a normal everyday thing. You know, just hang out in the woods, hang out with the elders, and I didn't think anything of it. It was just who I was, how I lived my life, and I knew nothing else.
And so as you moved into adulthood, what happens when you're thinking about where you want to be in your future, or what you want to be doing? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, in my adult life now that I'm looking to kind of pass on what was instilled in us within Ganyange. Now, you mentioned that my grandparents, my mother, they were some of the primary individuals that helped establish Ganyange in 1973. And then, so what they established laid the groundwork for people like myself and other children, as well as their grandchildren, my own children. and the ones that are coming into the future. So my primary goal is to keep that going. I mean, what they started, the bravery that they had to have in order to do that, to leave everything behind, to start Ganyonge, and they just knew it was going to work, laid the groundwork for us, and that's kind of what I want to do as well.
How many people live there now?
Well, that's something we always said is a military secret.
So you can't answer that. I say it's my job to ask. But how would you describe, for people who have not lived in a setting like that, what it is like being in a place where everyone's needs are looked out for by the community? Food, shelter, that kind of thing, where the idea is no one is going to be going without, right? Is that's part of the idea in a community like this?
Yes. That's how we work. We work together to support each other. We provide things that we need, and if somebody is in need, we provide it to them to the best of our ability.
Okay.
So yeah, it's more of a it's a real community.
Tyler, you want to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot the cough.
That's
It's
okay.
it's a big adjustment. It's a big adjustment, like coming from the reserve, the reservation, and moving back, because it's we have our own government and our own counseling and all all that goes along with it, and it's not the same on the reservation. It's like you have a set. It's like your money's pouring in, and it's coming from a government that's not you. That's not our government. It's like so when you come here, when you go to Ganyonge, there's an adjustment. You have to start learning about our ways, the way we operate, the way our whole structure operates. And it's all democracy. I remember talking to this man. He was it was a course he had going, and he talked about democracy. He says the only true form of democracy that ever existed was I think he said the Greeks or something, ancient Greeks or something like that. Then I said to him, I says, no, didn't they have slaves? And then, I'll get back to you on that one. I says, our the Iroquois Confederacy was the only true form of democracy that ever existed. And so later on, the next week, he came back and he says, "You know what? You're right." The professor that was teaching, he says, "You're right." And he says, "I looked in, I checked it out." He says, "You're right." And I was like, hey, I felt good about it. Hey, I was right about something.
He should visit Ganyonge.
Yeah, so it's like adjusting to that. It takes a little bit of an adjustment, and after a while, some people don't like it.
It's not for everybody?
No, it's not for everybody. It's like when, like I says, for me, it's like I more or less grew up that way. That's what I knew. Like from 13 years old. Before that, it's like, you're just a kid. But after that, it's like this is where you start to understand what's what. And
Well, in a moment, I'm going to bring in Daryl, who is on the line with us. Before I do that here, let me just ask our guest in studio. Part of there's a part in the film where I forget the exact language, but it was like we were negotiating with New York State for our own land. This idea that we're going to try to bargain for something that is ours. And in light of that, and in light of what you've created, I assume, Tyler, you've seen now that there's a trend, and it's a little less prevalent in 2025, but it's still around, where you'll see organizations before an event starts, they do what they call land acknowledgements, and they talk about, we stand on the land that was historically belonged to, different nations within Haudenosaunee, and I wonder, do you think those acknowledgments are helpful? Do you what do you make of that?
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's it's not enough, but I think it is helpful. I actually like the one where that woman sang the Canadian national anthem, and she goes, "Our home on native land." A lot of people didn't like that.
Oh, Canada, our home on native land.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh wait, did you see that?" Like, hey, like it was like on national television. Like nobody missed it. And so it was a big thing. It brought up a lot of issues. That our people have to deal with every day. It was like it started coming up. A lot of the issues started being talked about and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it is helpful.
So the land acknowledgments at least get people thinking about that history?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And let me ask, and I would tell you what you think about that as well. Have you seen the land acknowledgments that sometimes people do?
Not so much.
No, you haven't seen-
I might have heard about it, but I haven't.
So if I had started this program by saying, before we start the conversation, we want to acknowledge that this land has historically belonged to, and I listed historical tribes and, before colonization, et cetera, as a way of kind of, I don't know, trying to respectfully acknowledge the history of this place.
Mm.
I think there are some people who find that kind of overly self-congratulatory and posturing, and then there's some people who think that that is a respectful and helpful way to at least acknowledge what has happened over time. But if you haven't seen them, I don't want you to pin you down on this. I know it's it may sound strange.
I suppose it does help to acknowledge, and it might bring attention to some people who haven't even thought of the idea. But in terms of help, I'm not really sure how helpful that would be. It's just an acknowledgement, and you can acknowledge something and continue on your day without helping in any way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And by the way, Tyler, can I ask you about the hat that you're wearing?
Oh, I was down in Florida, so I picked it up. The Seminoles, Florida State Seminoles, the college football team.
Yeah.
So we used to say I was in Florida.
Okay. Do you like the mascot?
It's I know there's a lot of talk about that, but it was the only hat there that had this.
You just wanted to show that you were in Florida.
Yeah.
You had to get a Seminole hat.
It says Florida State on the back. So.
Yeah. Do mascots like that? Did they bother you? Did they offend you? I mean, you said that you've had friends say that they talk to non-native kids and they think that to be native means you're growing feathers out of your head and it feels ridiculous and poorly informed, et cetera. I wonder if you look at sports mascots in the same way or in a different way.
Yeah, well, basically it's like it's not saying much for who we are. It's like you're a mascot.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like who else does that? And we're people. We're actually like nations of people that actually roam this land for centuries and thousands of years. And now you're being put on a pet. You're considered like a pet, more or less. So yeah, it's it doesn't say much for doesn't give us a good feeling about ourselves, with a lot because a lot of the people that don't live on the reserves or reservations or whatever, or are not in contact with their own culture and language, and it's like they don't have much to hang on to, as as a native person, or,
Yeah.
you know, and so it's like seeing something like that. It's like it's like it's even harder for them. I understand, you know, because I have something to hang on to. You know, there's something that was put into me because of our my parents and my grandparents and making a move to Kanyanga and this kind of stuff. Like I was given a lot compared to what most people have. You know, like most Native people. So it's like for me, it's I I don't know about saying how I feel about myself, you know, because I it's like the normal thing for me is like is that, you know, like what they said, he grew up and it was normal, like he didn't know anything else, you know. So for a long time, that's the way it was for me, you know. So if you told me that back then, it would be a different story. It's like it wouldn't have really mattered to me, you know. But
Sure. Yeah.
but like today, like I went off and I did iron work and this and that, and got to know what the reservation life was for a while, and this and that, and it's like I can understand how people take offense to it, you know, like. So yeah, I do think it's offensive, you know. Like,
Okay. Yeah. What do you think?
I personally don't think it's offensive. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't have time to, I guess, think about those things. And it is true, though, that I agree with Tyler about Indians who maybe live on in the cities, or they've been detached from their culture to some degree, that might be something that kind of helps them connect to who they are by getting the general public to kind of have a different opinion and a different view of what mascots are. But for myself, it's not a thing, because there's other things that are bigger problems than a mascot.
Well, let me bring in Daryl Martin, who's on the line with us. And by the way, we've been talking with members of the Ganyange community who are featured in an upcoming film that you can see later this week. Mike Bradley is a documentary filmmaker and director, producer, and editor of the film that's called This Land. And is it technically in the short category? Is it a short?
It is a short, yeah.
It's 19 minutes long. So.
Yep, yeah. I mean, the festivals set their own sort of definition of what qualifies as a short. The Academy says it's 40 minutes is the cutoff, so
Okay,
anything
there
less
you go.
than that is a short.
Yep. So it's part of the Rochester International Film Festival, and you can see it Thursday at 7:30 at the Dryden. They would love to see you there. And it is a story that has really all kinds of interesting historical footage, news footage. Takes you back to the 1970s when the members of this community that we're talking with here, decided that they wanted to live on the land that really was their land, but in more traditional ways. New York State ends up in kind of a standoff. Reading through the history, troopers were called in as a result of this land dispute. They policed the area for 3 years until the really an armed occupation of the camp ended in 1977 after negotiations. So, and you've heard from our guests about how tense that time was, not knowing if that was going to be the site of, frankly, the next Attica or something like that. So it was a really tense time, but the better part of 50 years later, they're telling their story. And Mike Bradley's here talking about the film. Daryl Martin is on the line with us, who's a member of a community member of Ganyange. Daryl, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your own life in Ganyange.
Well, I went to Ganyange when it moved about 18 years old at the time. I showed up with there, and I went to stay at the what they call a single guy's house. But it was an ideal place to be for, somebody of my age. I didn't realize at the time, but I went to a place where there was actually, Native people working together, trying to build a community, building houses, in the gardens of rocks. Excuse me. Horse-drawn equipment they were using, plus the tractors, and trying to really struggle to make a go of making the community work. And part of making a community work is you have to provide for everybody, for everything. As a government, all has to be provided with food, shelter, Native people working together was probably like my biggest draw from the reserve. But I think when I talked to the people there and got to know the people that were living there, it dawned on me that, there was a lot of the same strife that was happening on the reserve that kind of like brought it all about. There was an incident that happened in Ganawaga where it was the evictions that happened, and the people that were doing the evictions kind of figured, after all the strife within the reservation, they realized that, there they are fighting on the reserve for a little postage-sized piece of land when they have all this territory in New York State and Vermont they could go and live at. Why are we fighting amongst our own, this territory when we have all this other land? And that's when they decided to make a move. And so that's what they did.
Well,
I think that's what really, really excites me.
yeah, so Daryl, and we'll work on trying to get a little tighter connection there, but Daryl's telling the story of why Ganyanke as a community was appealing and why it was formed more than 50 years ago. Let me grab a phone call from Terry in Manchester, who's been listening to this story. Hey, Terry, go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
Want to say welcome and I know to your gentleman in the studio. I work at a travel plaza on Route 90. And last night, a young man came in and he bought something and he took his wallet out and it was very much beaded. And I'm interested in that sort of thing. And it caught my attention immediately. And then he walked around a little bit and a woman came up and I could tell that they were connected, mother and son. And she took out her keys and she had beadwork on her keys. And I asked her if she did beadwork, and she said that she is now too old to do beadwork. But we had a nice conversation, and the young man took out his wallet again. I got to look at that again. Beautiful beadwork, and they told me a little bit I said, "Where are you headed?" And they said they're headed back to your neck of the woods, by the St. Lawrence River, up north by Ottawa. And I said, "Oh, I have a friend in Canton." And she said, "Yes, that's getting close." And it was just so nice. And as they left, I remembered my greeting that I've learned. And I said, "Aho." And she turned and she said to me, "We say ano." And so I called out, "Ano, ano." And off she went. And it is my privilege and pleasure to have that sort of interaction. So thank you for coming down and telling us your story.
Yeah, Terry, thank you again. For a lot of listeners, this is a new story. I don't know if that's a greeting that you use. Does that ring any bells, gentlemen?
The word that the Indian woman said was probably "ona," meaning like goodbye, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. And Terry, I appreciate that, but I was asking Tyler earlier this hour why so many people don't know these stories, and let me also ask Adaiwate, why do you think so many kids are growing up in this state with so little knowledge of Native history, the history of tribes in this state, of Haudenosaunee people, treaties, the evolution of territorial expansion and treaty breaking? Why do you think that people don't really have that education? Why do you think the state is not teaching that very holistically?
I'm not really sure. I can't really speak on that because I'm not sure. But maybe it's just not that important. Maybe it's just not that important to share and educate the public about who Indian people are, especially Haudenosaunee, or as we say, Mohawk Haudenosaunee Umwe. Because for the longest time we kind of just fell to the wayside, and the rest of the world kind of picked up and moved on. Well, the rest of our people due to our situations, kind of got left behind a little bit. And that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why Ganyange was established, was to kind of reverse that or create a starting point to rebuild. And that's where we are. But in terms of that, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. I mean, Tyler, do you agree that it's just an indication that maybe it's not that important to the people putting the curriculums together?
Well, if you look at residential schools, the whole intent of residential schools was to get rid of us. Our belief system, our whole culture,
language,
everything that we had was stripped from. My grandfather was taken away when he was 6 years old. They came to his house, the police and the priest, and said, "We're taking them," him and his brother. And they took them away. They took them to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And they never came home till they were 18. And everything was stripped from them. They didn't know anything. They didn't know what their people were about and how to anything. So this is what was going on. Hundreds of thousands of kids, were taken away. So it's like, why would I want you to know about what he's got? I don't want you to know what you have. I don't want anybody to know what's rightfully yours, because I'm on it, and it's mine. I'm saying it's mine.
It's a form of control.
Right. It's like it's mine. It's not yours.
Well, the history that is in the film This Land is at the core of what we're talking about, and I want to take our only break of the hour. We're going to come back, and I'll make sure Mike Bradley lets you know how you can see this film. We'll talk a little bit more about, maybe some of what Mike has learned as a filmmaker. You can't get everything into a 19-minute film that you learn, but that's why we have these conversations, and we'll come right back and continue it on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Michael says, thank you for airing this amazing conversation. I'm glad that I finally got to hear this story. It seems to me that the two most marginalized groups in our country are Native Americans and seniors. Our elected representatives don't seem to pay much attention to people living in horrible conditions on the reservations or in nursing homes. It's an interesting parallel. Michael, thank you for that note. I appreciate it. And we are glad to try to bring these conversations, parts of our history, to you. Mary Howell says, is this community financially viable? What does it do to generate income? She says, this is not intended to be disrespectful. Every business or farm or community has to bring in enough income to pay the bills and be able to do physical improvements. What products does this community sell? Thank you. That's from Mary Howell. Tyler, you want to hit that one first?
Syrup. We make syrup.
Syrup.
That's one of that's something that
and you sell the syrup.
We just finished up. Yeah, we sell some of it, but we keep for ourselves what we need, and then we will sell the rest. And good syrup.
It's good syrup.
Yeah, we just finished cleaning up a little bit and taking the taps out of the trees and all that.
She's asking in general, is the community kind of self-sustaining? Is it financially viable?
Sure. It's like our agricultural program is geared to provide the community. We plant what we can. Everybody's involved in it, and we've built up other stuff, we'll put up a gas station and a bingo and different stuff like that to generate some funding for stuff that we could use, and get people working. And it's even helping out, like outside of the community, people in the surrounding communities will come and they're given jobs, and it's helping them out too. It's not just our community that's benefiting from all the things that were developed there. So yeah, there's quite a few projects going on right now.
Okay. You feel like it's a self-sustaining place to be?
Yeah, so far it has been. I mean, with some of the smaller businesses that we have, well, we used to have like a holistic center, but we were having issues with that, so we don't have that anymore. But we also have a golf course, a 9-hole golf course, and that's doing pretty well so far. So with all these little businesses and gas station and the bingo hall and things like that, that it's sustaining us.
Okay. And I think we've got Daryl Martin still on the line with us. Daryl, anything you want to add about how the community sustains itself?
Well, I think it's raising funds because we live in a modern day society. You have to be able to buy things that you can't produce, and I think they're doing a really good job at keeping the whole community alive, because it's allowing them to acquire more land. It's allowing them to be really sufficient. But I was living there. I don't live there anymore. But when I was living there, we used to cut firewood pretty much 365 days a year just to heat the homes for the whole community, and then we would deliver water and do a lot of the gardening. Now, with some income coming in, the community can afford to, extend their labor a lot more, and it's also providing education for the people that live there. So the strifes, the hardships are gone, but I pretty much deem it to be a success so far.
Okay. Pat says that Pat notes that this is a community that has talked about democracy and that kind of a style of government. Do they participate in American democracy? Are they voting in American elections? What do they make of American elections? Oh boy. Tyler, you want to answer that?
No. No, actually, no, we don't. We don't vote in the American or Canadian elections, and the traditional people don't. There's other people that do, but traditional people don't vote.
You choose not to?
Yeah.
How come?
Because it's not my government. It's not who I am. I got to take part in another government. It takes a lot of work. So I don't have time for. I just don't have time anyway. It's and it's not who I am.
Okay. Awate, what about you?
Yeah, for myself and the Ganyanga people, we don't participate in any foreign, anything foreign, like American government, the Canadian government. We established Ganyanga to do just that, is to rebuild who we are. We have our own law, the Gainaregoa, or Great Laws of Peace, that we adhere to, and we follow that. We have our own governmental structure. We have our council system that is broken up by clans, and it's through consensus and then unanimous decision by all the community. So we have all of these things, our own things that we have for our own government. So we don't participate, and we're never going to, because we have to push on, we have to build, we have to create a space for ourselves in this world as we continue to grow in. By participating in that, whether it's on a community level or individually, that jeopardizes who we are. Or that's our view. We just stay away from that altogether.
I'm going to ask Mike Bradley, who is the filmmaker behind This Land. We've been going in a lot of different directions that your film didn't necessarily have time to do in 19 minutes. What's on the cutting room floor that you wished you had kept in this film that you think the public would really benefit from hearing?
A lot is on the cutting room floor, yeah. The film is, like you said, just under 20 minutes. I think I have maybe 12 or 14 hours of interview alone. There's a whole lot more about the history of the evictions that Tyler mentioned in the 70s, and kind of more backstory as to why people felt the need to leave Kahnawake in the first place, that, could turn into its own feature-length film at some point, maybe. But it's just a whole fascinating history going back hundreds of years.
And do you feel like you have yourself been able to really learn the full picture of the story of Ganyaga now?
Yeah, I like I said before, I didn't know anything about it before, so that sort of was the initial inspiration to make a film, was just that I had been to Moss Lake many times. I grew up in Western New York, and I didn't know anything about this. And yeah, so everything I learned was new information. I did a great deal of research before I filmed anything. And, I learned a ton about just Mohawk history and the relationship between the Mohawk and the state of New York and many other things, yeah.
So as we get ready to close this program, I want to ask our guests in studio how they want non-native kids to be learning. And one of the first memories I have from my childhood was going to a summer camp down at Chautauqua Lake, Western New York. And the camp is called Anyasa. It's a YMCA camp. If listeners are familiar with Camp Corey on Keuka Lake, it's a sister camp, very similar. And when I was growing up, there were the young boys, the middle boys, and the older boys, the campers, and the young girls, the middle girls, the older girls. The young boys were the Onondagas, the middle boys were the Cayugas, and the older boys were the Senecas. The young girls, the Oneidas, the middle girls were the Tuscaroras, and the older girls were the Mohawks. And that's the first time I heard, growing up in Ohio and parts of New York, the first time I really even learned about, the Six Nations. And it was clunky. The director of the camp would, on Sunday nights, tell the story of kind of some of the story of the people who lived on that land years before. For years, he would paint himself up, wear a headdress, come on land carrying a torch, tell the story. And then he stopped doing that out of trying to be respectful. He is a teacher, but he said he is imperfect, and he wants to help kids learn these stories. So the camp still exists. It's an important piece of my own family's past. And I don't know how I feel about all of that. Tyler, I saw you winced a little when I read through the list of the camp, the boys' camps. Every year I'd go back to camp in the summer and they say, "Are you a Cayuga or are you still an Onondaga?" Like, "Oh, I moved up. I'm a Cayuga." "No, I'm a Seneca now." I mean, that's like the hierarchy of the age of the boys, and it was like a big deal. And I'll never forget that we were known as the different villages. So it may seem crass. It may seem like a way of caricaturizing your people, or is it a way of at least introducing ideas to kids and teaching? I'm curious about that. It's a big inhale.
Yeah. I'm not too sure. There's not enough. There's not enough time, on the planet, to start to be able to inform people about who we are.
Yeah.
It's like, and things like that. It has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with us. It's like. We're just being labeled,
kind of like with the sports, the sports
kind of like that, and it really has nothing to do with us. And I don't know. I just
no, I understand. I take the point. Let me ask Rawate, what do you think?
In terms of getting people to maybe better understand who we are, maybe it's just as simply as passing on what you know, even if it's a little bit of information that's true, and by word it could spread slowly from one person to the next, and as individuals learn about it. And I would just encourage that you just go learn about who we actually are, instead of maybe hearing about us occasionally, just study who we are. And if you're in the area, maybe stop in and visit and maybe ask some questions in person.
Yeah.
You know?
Say hello. How do you feel about summer camps using the names, the Mohawks, the Senecas, the Onondaga?
I guess it's similar to like mascots. It
Doesn't bother you?
It doesn't bother me.
Doesn't
No.
bother you? Yeah. No, I mean, I understand there's going to be varied opinions, in different communities. And just like anything else, no one's going to agree on everything. What I do hope is that, for myself and for anybody if you're going to camp and that's how you're learning, that you go beyond that and you actually take time to try to read and study and maybe visit and get to know the real people who don't actually, as Tyler said, have feathers growing out of their heads, and are with us today. It's amazing how many young kids say, "Oh yeah, Native peoples lived a long time ago." So this film is a really good way to bring important history to us. Mike Bradley, congratulations on This Land. It's important work.
Thank you.
Mike's the filmmaker. You can see the film as part of the Rochester International Film Festival this Thursday, 7:30, at the Dryden Theater at the George Eastman Museum. They would love to see you there as part of the festival. And I want to thank both Raiwate and Tyler for being with us. Daryl on the line. Daryl, we really appreciate your time. It's been a kind of a rough connection. That's our fault, but we really appreciate the wisdom that you bring to us here. And to both the gentlemen in studio, thank you for making time for our program today.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank you. And from all of us at Connections, thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us on the YouTube channel if you are. Wherever you're joining us, have a wonderful afternoon. We're back with you tomorrow on member-supported public media.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.